Hello to you and welcome again to my channel and to my part number 2 for how to sew a lady's jacket. I will start by putting together the main material, the upper material of the jacket. Step by step I will show you. When there are certain parts like a straight seam, I will only show you and explain in which following I did all the particular jobs. But when it comes to a slightly more difficult sewing part, I will really show you on the machine exactly how to do it. Then I will show you also exactly how to put the lining together. So with other words, after you've done your preparation and your cutting from your jacket, here is part number 2 for you, how to put the main material complete together. So are you ready to do some good working? Then let's get started right now.
So let's start with quite some easy seams first of all. Take your sleeve, put the upper sleeve, which is the big part as you can see on the bottom, and then fold your smaller piece, the underneath sleeve, on top and stitch it the width you did your seam allowance together. In my case this is 1 centimeter. Then you can, if you wish, go to the ironing board and iron the seam apart. In my case, I decided I want to stitch over this particular seam, and I stitch it over on the big part of the upper sleeve. And then, of course, right away I also close the underneath seam right away as well, 1 centimeter. Keep on looking for the end of your seam that you have to make sure you have no extra material standing over which you didn't cut. Unfold the ironed over hem that is there already, because that's got to be stitched flat together as you can see here. And again on this one you also have the possibility ironing it apart or stitching it over, as I will do. And there again you can see I'm doing this on the upper arm part. The seam is lying towards that part and I stitch about 1 millimeter width next to the seam. So it always will be lying very flat and very even, and it's a very tight, tidy finish. But you make the decision if you want to only iron it maybe. So that means the sleeves are ready to be put on the ironing board again to iron all the seams apart. Now I take my front pieces and I first close this slightly round curved seam. Watch on the bottom if you have sideways going seams that you put them together correctly, and also look for any kind of marks and cuts you might have in the edge of the material, that they will always fit together. This is very important. And here again you're stitching on the small piece which you just put on the top of your main material. This particular seam we're calling in Germany the princess seam. You might have a similar name for it. So first of all, before I continue, I do the same to the other side. You see this little corner is sticking over on the top. This is correct. Otherwise you don't get an even line for your arm sleeve. So there is my cuts as an example, which got to fit exactly together. And first my underneath part, I always leave the material lying the way it wants to lie, and only slowly, bit by bit, let the materials for the edge running towards each other. But now, as I like to stitch this particular seam over as well, there you have the choice also to iron it apart. But as you can see, it's very round, so it needs on the side, on the big part, some cut ends, as you can see me doing here right now, because otherwise it will pull. And now after I've done those cut ends, but only on the front, on the middle part, not on the side part, now nothing will be pulling or giving funny waves. That's why it's definitely necessary, if you want to stitch it over, or even if you want to iron it, you got to do those cut ends. So exactly the same on this one. On the front part I do all those cut-ins about on a 2-3 centimeters apart. You have to see how round your actual pattern is, and you can see my seam is lying towards the front middle, and that is where underneath the seam is, and that's where I'm stitching. So my fronts are finished as well. I continue with the back part. I first close my back middle seam. You might have done your cutting in a fold. Then of course you don't have that seam, so just forget about this particular one. Here I don't need to cut anything in, but I want to stitch it over. I got my seam lying under the left part of the jacket now, of the back part, and that is what I'm stitching down. But again, you can iron it apart if you wish. Now I need to first of all do my little swing or loop or belt in the back. So I take my 8x8 cut piece, close one side by 1 centimeter, iron it apart and turn it inside out. Now I take this particular little part and just put the seam underneath in the middle and close both sides up for me. It makes it easier for the next job that I want to do. Now this next piece, the bigger piece, I only cut roughly in the lengths, but the widths I cut 12 centimeters wide, and I make in the middle of the widths 2 cuts as you've just seen, and I stitch very slightly this little loop onto my 2 cuts, put it right away on the middle there, and just hold it with a couple of stitches. Now I fold this over, right side lying in the inside, and I just do a 1 centimeter seam. As on all my cuttings, I got a 1 centimeter seam allowance, and I stitch this long belt, you could say, together. In the moment that's done, I will have to go again to my iron board, and I iron this seam apart right there. Yes, so it's in the middle. And of course, again, when that's ironed, I have to turn it inside out. However you like to do that, you can do it with a little stick, or you can close up one side first, just fiddle around with it and turn it inside out. And when you see this loop is hanging there, you think, oh, something's gone wrong here. No, not really. It's just the way you turned it. So what you have to do then is take one of your sides, one of your ends from your long tail piece here, push it inside that little loop, pull it through, and then put it in the position right there in the middle until it's exactly right as you wanted to have it. And again here now, I will very briefly stitch both sides once up. The seam's got to be lying in the middle of this part, because it's going to be underneath. And again, I have to go to my iron board and iron both sides a little bit flat, not the middle, and then you can see what it looks like. I've done myself on the side piece of this back some marks, approximately where I want this belt to be. So the little loop has got to be on the middle seam, of course. And then when I stitch the other side on, I'm putting a little bit of width in that belt, because later on when I got the side pieces on, it needs that little bit of width. If you put it on totally straight, it's going to be pulling. So make sure you add a little bit of, push some little bit of width into that middle part in right there. So again, we're taking our 2 little side pieces and do exactly the same practically what we've done on the front piece. Again, this little funny corner has got to be sticking over. That would be wrong. That's correct. And you start where these 2 pieces are meeting, exactly there. And hopefully you got some marks or cuts in the side, in the edge of your pieces there, because that makes it very easy now to slowly put that seam together. You could see I had one mark there, a little cut. Also here I fold the hem open and stitch all the way through and do exactly the same on the other side. If you can see, I'm always doing things pairwise. I started there on the top, and of course I got to start there on the bottom, and very important, stitch on the little piece. Do not stitch on the big piece. Not that you have the smaller piece lying on the bottom and putting this big piece on. That would be wrong. And here again I got a small curved seam without any marks, and without any cut-ins that I'm doing. This would be pulling no matter if I iron it or if I stitch over it. That's why it needs a couple of little cuts in that seam, but only on that piece as you've just seen. Now I put this loop a little bit out of the way because I do not want to stitch it down. That wouldn't look right as a loop. It's got to be rolling over there over the edge. Looks much, much nicer. So again here I'm starting on the bottom, and as you can see I'm stitching on the middle part, again on the big part, not on the two little side parts. I'm not stitching. That wouldn't be correct. It's got to be done like that. You're stitching on the middle part. So that is the back, totally finished with a lovely little loop lying there. Now comes a very important part. You're taking, before we close the sides and the shoulders, take your two front pieces and mark yourself exactly how you want to stitch your revers, your front, your color, because it is so important that these little short pieces that you're going to be stitching are exactly on both sides the same length and the same height. Otherwise this looks very stupid, because we're going to be stitching like I've just showed you along there, and you can mark the total top of the color as well if you wish. That will make it much easier for you if you're not so firm with sewing yet. So before we do the shoulder and the sides, very, very important, mark yourself these parts. And another thing, which color will you take to put in here? As we're doing the main material here, it's got to be the underneath color that you're putting in, which is the slightly smaller one, because the normal size, the big size, will be stitched into the lining, not into the main material. Very, very important. Otherwise, your color will never ever fit. So I've got the marking done on my color and on the front piece where the rollover will be later, and I can close my first side. As you can see, I'm starting the way we're looking at it on the right side of the front there on the bottom, and so I can directly continue doing the shoulder here as well, 1 centimeter, as I mentioned before, because that is my seam allowance everywhere. So I can exactly continue there. I don't need to turn anything or mess around. I take this shoulder, with other words the next one, do my 1 centimeter shoulder, and the continuation of course is just to do the side seam again. As you can see, I speeded all this up for you, so we really get through this jacket on the easy jobs, which we've done so far, quite quickly, to get then onto the bigger and better jobs that we have to do. All right, here we're on the bottom already. Now I will first go on my ironing board and iron the sides and the shoulders apart. Very important. So my shoulder is ironed apart, my side seam is ironed apart, and practically I've checked the whole jacket over again that really everything is pressed and in a very finished off position and condition already. So I like to repeat. The color you have to stitch into this main material here now is the underneath color, the smaller one. You've done all your markings, and you can do some more in case if that is not enough for you. You continue and draw your 1 centimeter line there. But the important one is the one I've shown you, which you can see here, because I measured it, I got a special pattern for it, and I exactly mark it both sides the same lengths. Now you see my little cut there, because that is exactly the point underneath my cut on 1 centimeter where my first stitch together with the color that I'm putting in is got to be. 1 centimeter is actually sticking over from the actual color, because you can see there is my line, my drawing, but that point underneath, you can look underneath, is got to exactly fit together with my drawing on my color on the top. So I start exactly there where my line is that are marked, and very important, that stitch, that first stitch is really got to be held very, very firm. Now I stitch so far that I can see when I turn with my machine that I got exactly 1 centimeter again for continuation. Now there's 2 ways of doing it. I show you on this side one way, and on the second side, on the other side, the other way. I'm taking my scissors, and they got to be good scissors. They got to really cut properly on the front all the way to the end. And I'm cutting the main material, not the color, underneath towards the needle. So I practically finish in front of the needle, which is stuck into the material, because then when I've done that, I can turn around like I've just done and continue. And there was already my shoulder part and my first mark that I have in the color, because they got to fit together. And when you've done that preparation so well, it's no problem whatsoever, because here comes the next. You got your back middle, and I got a mark there. So all I have to do is continue to right there. And the continuation goes the same. From that back middle, again, I stitch towards my next shoulder. And first of all, we can have a look at this corner. That is done. Underneath it's cut, and that's the way it looks like. All right, but we continue first here. And I'm stitching from my back middle to the shoulder, the second shoulder. And I do have in my color my little cut. I'm putting the shoulder seams apart because I ironed it apart. Of course, then I got to put it underneath apart. And here my cut is exactly on top of my shoulder again, as you can see. And I'm coming to the end of this first part here. And again, you got to look now, when you come out straight, that you need a 1 centimeter to turn around left over. So I show you the other way how to do it. If you don't want to cut underneath, stitch back and forth so that seam is really held, that last stitch. It's so important. Now take your scissors and cut the main material, not the color, exactly towards that last stitch, the end of that seam that you have there. That's how it's got to be. Because now you can see when you fold it around, take it like you want to continue the sewing, and now you can see that's the way it's lying there. So you continue stitching exactly where you had your last stitch there. And again, very, very important, that seam where you're starting now should not open up again. That's why you got to do a very good back and forward stitching. And now this part is got to fit again with the underneath. If you don't see it well, make yourself a little mark, but you also have the little cut in already. So stitch exactly to your drawing that you have there, and that will fit with your cutting from underneath. There you see it. That is perfectly exactly as I like to do it. And now you can see there is no fold somewhere stitched in exactly correctly. Now this seam we have to iron apart. It would be too thick and not clever. You can put it in one direction, but usually you don't. If it's a well-made jacket, you wouldn't put this in one direction. But we have to cut it in a little bit, not the color, only the main material. Because when I iron it apart, it's going to pull otherwise, because this is going to be too tight with a round neckline that was there. So you can also check then when you've done the first cuts, and if you see it's not enough, that it doesn't want to spring open, then put another couple of little cuts in. And now I have to go and iron this color apart. And now on the very first video I mentioned to you that I actually got 3 videos. Well, I have to apologize because I had some big problems trying to load this long video into YouTube up. And that's why after this one there will be an extra video coming directly after this, hopefully even today, because I couldn't load it up in one go. So please look in again. There will be in the next 24 hours definitely part number 3 coming up for you to continue how to put the sleeves in, and then of course the number 4 to really finish the jacket off. So for this moment I say thank you for watching. Thank you for supplying my channel. Is that the right word? No. Something like that. You know what I mean. Okay. Okay. I hope you can do something with this video so far already. And please look for the next one coming up in the next 24 hours. Thank you. Goodbye and tschüss.